The emergency signal cut through the peaceful morning at Station Prime like a knife through soft metal. Ambassador Tala was drinking her morning tea when the communication center exploded with activity. Red lights flashed across every screen, and the universal distress frequency crackled to life with desperate voices speaking in the musical language of the Kelvari. "Please, anyone who can hear this message, we need help," the voice pleaded through the static. "This is Captain Nella of the Kelvari Defense Force. Our world is under attack. The Nyx Empire has surrounded our planet with a massive fleet. They are bombing our cities. Our children are hiding in underground shelters. We cannot hold them much longer." The transmission continued with details that made Tala's stomach turn cold. The Nyx Empire had brought over 200 warships to the peaceful Kelvari system. The Kelvari had only managed to destroy 12 enemy vessels before their own fleet was wiped out. Now the planet was defenseless, with millions of innocent people waiting for death from above. Within an hour, the Grand Council chamber was filled with representatives from across the galaxy. The massive circular room buzzed with worried conversations in dozens of languages. Tala watched as the most powerful species in known space discussed what could be done about the crisis. The Alterian delegate stood first, his tall, graceful form catching the light from the chamber's crystal ceiling. "The Nyx Empire has violated every treaty we have signed," he said in his smooth, cultured voice. "But their fleet is simply too large for any single member world to challenge. We would need at least 500 ships to match their numbers." The insectoid Vex representative clicked her mandibles in agreement. "My people could contribute 50 vessels, but we would need months to reach the Kelvari system. The Kelvari do not have months. They have days, perhaps hours." Other delegates nodded sadly. The math was simple and brutal. No single species had enough ships close enough to the Kelvari system to make a difference. Even if they combined their forces, it would take weeks to organize such a massive fleet. By then, the Kelvari would be extinct. Meanwhile, thousands of light years away, Director Kane sat in his office aboard Research Station Beta, orbiting the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. The station was humanity's farthest outpost, a collection of metal modules and communication arrays that monitored deep space for interesting signals. Kane had been doing this job for 15 years, listening to the galaxy's radio chatter and filing reports that few people back on Earth ever read. The Kelvari distress signal reached his equipment at exactly 14:37 ship time. Kane had heard emergency transmissions before, usually cargo ships with engine problems or scientific expeditions that had gotten lost. This was different. The desperation in the alien voice made Kane's hands shake as he recorded the message and ran it through the translation computers. When the full meaning became clear, Kane immediately activated the emergency communication link to Earth. The quantum transmission would take several minutes to reach the home planet, but this was exactly the kind of situation that required instant contact with the Terran Defense Fleet. Admiral Ross was in the middle of a boring budget meeting when Kane's message arrived. The Admiral was a heavy-set man with gray hair and scars on his hands from his days as a ship engineer. He had been expecting discussions about fuel costs and maintenance schedules. Instead, his aide handed him a tablet with a message that would change everything. "Sir, you need to see this right away," the aide said. "It's from Director Kane at Station Beta, Priority Alpha classification." Ross read the message twice, then called for his senior staff. Within 30 minutes, the conference room was full of officers studying star charts and ship readiness reports. The Kelvari system was marked with a red dot on the main display, showing its position relative to human space. "It would take our fastest ships 4 days to reach them," said Captain Blake, a woman with short black hair and intense green eyes. "That's assuming we leave immediately and push the engines to maximum burn." "What ships do we have ready for immediate deployment?" Ross asked. His operations officer consulted her tablet. "We have the Resilience, the Endurance, the Defiance, and the Triumph ready for space. The Storm and the Victory could be ready in 12 hours. That's 6 heavy cruisers and their escort squadrons. Maybe 40 ships total." The room fell quiet. 40 ships against 200 was not good odds by any measure. Every officer in the room knew that sending such a small force against the Nyx Empire was likely a suicide mission. "Sir," Captain Blake said carefully, "we could request assistance from the Galactic Council. Perhaps they could coordinate with other species. Admiral Ross shook his head. I've been monitoring their emergency communications. They're still arguing about who should contribute what ships and who should command the operation. The Kelvari will be dead before they finish their first committee meeting. He stood up and walked to the star chart, studying the distances and travel times. The way I see it, we have two choices. We can follow proper diplomatic channels, file a request with the Council, and wait for approval while an entire species gets wiped out. Or we can do what humans have always done when someone needs help. What's that, sir? Asked Major Torres, the Marine commander. We go help them, Ross said simply. We launch every ship we have and figure out the rest on the way. The decision was made in less than an hour. Admiral Ross sent a message to Earth's government informing them of the situation and his intended response. He did not wait for approval. By the time the politicians on Earth finished reading his report, the Terran Defense Fleet would already be in hyperspace. News of humanity's response reached Station Prime through the normal diplomatic channels. Ambassador Tala was reviewing casualty reports from the Kelvari system when her aide brought her the message from Earth. She read it 3 times before she believed what she was seeing. They're actually going? She asked. Yes, Ambassador. The human fleet launched 6 hours ago. They should reach the Kelvari system in approximately 96 hours. Tala immediately called an emergency session of the Security Council. The news that humanity was responding to the Kelvari distress call spread quickly through the station's diplomatic quarter. Within an hour, representatives from a dozen species had gathered in the council chamber to discuss this unexpected development. This is madness, declared the Alterian delegate. The humans have barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Their ships are primitive compared to Nyx vessels. They will be slaughtered. The Vex representative agreed. 40 human ships against 200 Nyx warships is not courage, it is stupidity. The humans will accomplish nothing except adding their own deaths to this tragedy. But in the back of the chamber, an old Korthani named Sage Moore listened to the debate with growing unease. The Korthani were among the oldest species in the galaxy, and their libraries contained knowledge that others had forgotten. Moore remembered reading ancient warnings about worlds that were too dangerous for normal life. Worlds where the environment itself was an enemy that never stopped trying to kill everything that lived there. The humans called their world Earth, but in the old star charts, it had a different designation. It was listed among the forbidden worlds, the places where only the most desperate refugees would ever try to settle. It was a death world, a planet so hostile that any species tough enough to survive there would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. As the other delegates continued their arguments about human foolishness, Sage Moore quietly began making preparations. If his ancient knowledge was correct, the galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented. The Deathworld species was going to war, and nothing would ever be the same. Admiral Ross stood on the bridge of the TDF Resilience as his fleet moved through hyperspace toward the Kelvari system. The ship hummed with quiet efficiency around him, every system running at peak performance despite being pushed harder than ever before. Through the viewing ports, he could see the twisted colors of hyperspace streaming past like a river of light and shadow. The human fleet consisted of 6 heavy cruisers and 34 smaller vessels. Each ship had been designed and built using lessons learned from centuries of surviving on Earth. The hulls were thick and heavily armored, built to withstand impacts that would crush vessels from gentler worlds. The engines were powerful but simple, designed to keep running even when damaged. Most importantly, every system had multiple backups because humans had learned long ago that when things went wrong, they usually went very wrong very quickly. Captain, Blake moved between the control stations, checking readiness reports from each department. The crew worked with calm efficiency, but Ross could see the tension in their movements. Everyone knew they were flying toward a battle that should be impossible to win. 40 ships against 200 was mathematics that did not favor survival. How? Are the Marines, Major Torres? Ross asked through the communication system. Torres's voice came back steady and confident. Ready for whatever we find, Admiral. The boys and girls are loaded for bear and spoiling for a fight. In the Marine quarters, Torres walked between rows of soldiers checking their equipment. These were not the ceremonial guards that some species used for military display. These were fighters trained in the harshest environments Earth could provide. They had learned to fight in burning deserts where the temperature could kill an unprotected human in minutes. They had trained in frozen wastelands where the cold could freeze exposed skin in seconds. They had practiced combat in deep jungles, where every plant and animal was trying to kill them. The Marines wore armor that looked crude compared to the elegant designs used by other galactic species. It was thick and heavy, built to stop bullets and shrapnel and claws and teeth and anything else that might try to hurt the person inside. Their weapons were simple and reliable, designed to work in mud and sand and snow and rain. Every Marine carried enough ammunition and supplies to fight for days without resupply, because Earth had taught them that help might not always come in time. Back on Station Prime, the news of humanity's response had spread throughout the diplomatic community. Ambassador Tala found herself fielding questions from representatives who seemed unable to believe what they were hearing. The elegant Altarian delegate visited her office personally, something that rarely happened given the vast difference in their species' social status. "Ambassador Tala," he said in his musical voice, "surely you can contact your fleet and convince them to reconsider this course of action. The Nyx Empire is not known for showing mercy to those who interfere with their conquests." Tala looked at the tall, graceful alien with his perfect features and silk-smooth skin. The Altarians came from a world of gentle rains and soft breezes, where the most dangerous creature was roughly equivalent to Earth's rabbits. They had never known hunger or thirst or cold or heat that could kill. War to them was an intellectual exercise conducted with elegant ships at safe distances. "I'm afraid you don't understand," Tala replied. "Once humans decide to help someone, they don't stop until the job is done or they're all dead. It's just how we are." The Altarians' confusion was obvious. But surely survival instinct would override such impulses. No rational species would sacrifice themselves for strangers. Before Tala could respond, her communication panel chimed with an incoming message from Earth. She read it quickly and smiled. "Actually, Admiral Ross has just informed me that Earth is sending additional support. 3 more battle groups are being assembled and will follow the First Fleet." The Altarians' elegant composure cracked slightly. "More ships? But they must—" "No, this is hopeless. Hopeless is a word humans don't really understand," Tala said. "We come from a world that has been trying to kill us since the day we first walked upright. We've survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions and asteroid impacts and diseases that should have wiped us out completely. We're still here because we're too stubborn to know when to quit." In another part of Station Prime, the insectoid Vex representative was having a similar conversation with her military advisors. The Vex had conquered dozens of worlds through careful planning and overwhelming force. They understood warfare as a calculated process where victory went to whoever could bring the most ships and weapons to bear. "The human fleet composition makes no sense," her tactical officer reported. "Their ships are too heavily armored for their size, which must make them slow and clumsy. They carry far too many weapons for vessels of their mass. The power requirements alone should make them unstable." "Perhaps they are simply primitive," the representative suggested. "They may not understand proper ship design principles." But, in the ancient archives deep within the Korthani section of Station Prime, Sage Moore was reading files that had not been accessed for centuries. The Korthani had been spacefaring when most of the current galactic powers were still learning to make fire. Their records contained warnings and observations about worlds that were too dangerous for colonization. Earth was listed in the most dangerous category. The file described a world of constant catastrophes where the weather itself was a weapon. Storms that could destroy cities, earthquakes that could split continents, volcanoes that could change the climate of entire hemispheres. The ocean itself was filled with creatures that could swallow ships whole. But the most disturbing part of the file was the final entry, written by a Korthani explorer who had observed Earth from a safe distance thousands of years ago. "The species that evolves on this world will be unlike anything we have encountered. They will be shaped by constant adversity into something that can survive anywhere and fight anyone. If they ever reach the stars, they will be a force that could reshape the galaxy." Sagemore closed the file and made his way to the main communication center. He needed to send a message to the Korthani homeworld immediately. The ancient warnings were about to be proven true. Meanwhile, aboard the Resilience, Admiral Ross received a priority transmission from Galactic Council headquarters. The message was polite but firm, requesting that the human fleet withdraw from the situation and allow the Council to handle the crisis through proper diplomatic channels. Ross read the message twice, then deleted it. Captain Blake noticed his expression and raised an eyebrow. "Bad news, Admiral?" "Just politicians being politicians," Ross replied. "They want us to turn around and let them handle things with committee meetings and strongly worded letters." "What are your orders, sir?" Ross looked at the tactical display showing their fleet's position. They were still 2 days away from the Kelvari system, but already he could see the first signs of their destination ahead. The stars were becoming more familiar as they approached the edge of known space. "We stay the course, Captain. 40 ships, or 400, it doesn't matter. Someone called for help and we answered. That's what humans do." The fleet continued through hyperspace, carrying humanity's first real military force into the unknown. Behind them, the galaxy watched and waited to see what would happen when the Deathworld species finally went to war. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kelvari system, like a pack of wolves entering a battlefield. Admiral Ross stood on the bridge of the Resilience, watching the tactical display as sensors painted a picture of devastation that made his jaw clench with anger. The beautiful blue-green world of Kelvar Prime was surrounded by a massive ring of enemy ships, their weapons firing down at the planet's surface in steady, methodical volleys. 212 enemy vessels confirmed, reported the sensor officer. Nyx Empire configuration. They're maintaining a blockade formation around the planet. Ross could see the burn scars on the planet's surface even from this distance. Entire cities had been reduced to glowing craters. The Nyx fleet had been bombing the world for days, systematically destroying everything the Kelvari had built over centuries of peaceful civilization. "Any response to our arrival?" Captain Blake asked. "The Nyx flagship is hailing us, Admiral," the communications officer reported. "Put them through." The main screen filled with the image of a creature that looked like it had been designed by nightmares. Lord Vex of the Nyx Empire was nearly 8 feet tall, covered in black scales that reflected the light from his ship's bridge. His eyes were yellow and cold, and his mouth was filled with teeth that could tear through metal. He had conquered 17 star systems for the Nyx Empire, and his reputation for cruelty was known throughout the galaxy. "I am Lord Vex, Commander, of the Nyx 4th Fleet," the alien said in a voice like grinding stone. "You will identify yourselves and explain your presence in this system." Ross stepped forward. "Admiral Ross, Terran Defense Fleet. We're here to help the Kelvari." Lord Vex laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Terran? I am not familiar with this species. You have 40 primitive vessels against my fleet of over 200 advanced warships. Withdraw now, and I will allow you to live." "Counteroffer," Ross said calmly. "You withdraw now and we won't have to destroy your entire fleet." The Nyx commander's expression changed from amusement to rage. "You dare threaten me? Your ships look like they were built by children playing with scrap metal. I will crush you like insects." The transmission ended abruptly. Within seconds, the Nyx fleet began moving into attack formation. Ross watched the enemy ships spreading out across the display, their movements precise and coordinated. They flew in perfect geometric patterns, each vessel maintaining exact distance from its neighbors. It was beautiful and deadly and completely predictable. "All ships, this is Admiral Ross," he announced over the fleet communications. "Execute pattern Delta. Remember, we're not here to fight fair, we're here to win." The human fleet scattered, like a flock of birds hit by a stone. Ships that had been flying in neat formation suddenly broke apart and began moving in seemingly random directions. Some accelerated toward the enemy at maximum speed, others decelerated and fell behind. A few began flying in wide circles that made no tactical sense according to standard galactic warfare doctrine. Lord Vex watched the human response from his command bridge with growing confusion. "What are they doing?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Unknown, my lord. Their formation has completely collapsed. Perhaps their command structure has failed, or perhaps they are cowards who panic when faced with real opposition," Vex snarled. "All ships engage targets of opportunity. Destroy them quickly so we can return to finishing the planet. The Nyx fleet opened fire with their primary weapons, sending streams of plasma and particle beams toward the human ships. The first volley should have destroyed at least a dozen enemy vessels. Instead, the human ships twisted and turned through the incoming fire like dancers avoiding raindrops. Ships that should have been hit cleanly slipped aside at the last second. Vessels that were targeted by multiple enemy guns somehow found gaps in the crossfire that mathematics said should not exist. Impossible, breathed the Nyx tactical officer. No one can predict plasma beam trajectories with that accuracy. But the humans were not predicting anything. They were reacting with reflexes trained by a lifetime of avoiding death on a world that never stopped trying to kill them. These were people who had learned to dodge lightning strikes and outrun avalanches. They had spent their entire lives reading the subtle signs that meant danger was coming, and they could feel the buildup of energy in enemy weapons the way their ancestors had felt the approach of storms. Captain Blake commanded the TDF Endurance as it rolled and twisted through a barrage of enemy fire that should have vaporized her ship. She had grown up in the tornado zones of North America, where the weather could go from calm to deadly in seconds. Reading the flow of battle was no different from reading the wind patterns that warned of approaching danger. Enemy cruiser trying to bracket us, her tactical officer reported. Let them think they've got us, Blake replied, watching the enemy ship's position on her display. At the last second, she ordered her helm to execute a maneuver that sent the Endurance diving toward the planet's gravity well. The Nyx cruiser's shots passed harmlessly through the space where her ship had been a moment before. Meanwhile, Major Torres was preparing his Marines for something no other species had ever attempted. The human ships were not just dodging enemy fire. They were getting closer to the Nyx vessels with every passing minute, using the confusion of battle to position themselves for boarding actions. Remember, Torres told his troops over the communication system, these aliens have never fought anyone from a Deathworld. They don't know what we're capable of. Use that advantage. The first boarding pods launched from the TDF Defiance as it swept past a Nyx destroyer. The small craft were basically armored boxes with rockets attached, designed to punch through enemy hulls and deliver Marines directly into hostile ships. Most galactic species considered boarding actions to be primitive and dangerous. Humans considered them to be Tuesday. Lord Vex watched his tactical display with growing alarm as human boarding pods attached themselves to 3 of his ships. How are they getting so close? He demanded. Why can't we hit them? Their movement patterns are completely unpredictable, my lord, his officer replied. They appear to be reacting to our weapon signatures before we even fire. That's impossible. No species has reflexes that fast. But even as he spoke, Vex could see the truth on his own sensors. The human ships were not just avoiding his weapons. They were using the energy discharges from Nyx guns to track the positions of his vessels. Every time a Nyx ship fired, it revealed its location to human sensors that had been designed to detect the faintest traces of radiation in the void of space. The boarding actions began with explosions that echoed through the hulls of 3 Nyx ships. Major Torres led the assault on the enemy destroyer, his Marines moving through the alien vessel like a flood of destruction. The Nyx crew had never faced enemies who could fight in zero gravity, in toxic atmospheres, in radiation that would kill most species in minutes. The humans wore armor that let them survive in the vacuum of space and weapons that worked in conditions that would disable more sophisticated equipment. Alien boarding parties have taken decks 7 through 12, came the panicked report from the Nyx destroyer. They're moving through areas we sealed off due to radiation leaks. They don't seem to be affected by the contamination. Lord Vex stared at his tactical display as the battle continued to turn against him. The human fleet was still outnumbered 5-1, but they were fighting like nothing he had ever encountered. They moved through his formations like ghosts, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before his ships could respond effectively. For the first time in his career, Lord Vex began to understand that he might have made a serious mistake. These humans were not like the other species he had conquered. They were something new and dangerous, and they were winning. The battle had been raging for 3 hours when Engineer Cole found himself crawling through a damaged section of the TDF Resilience, with sparks flying around his head and the smell of burning metal filling his nose. The ship had taken a direct hit from a Nyx plasma cannon, and half the power grid was offline. In the darkness of the damaged corridor, Cole worked by feel and instinct, connecting cables and rerouting power systems, while the ship shook from enemy fire. "Cole, I need engines back online in the next 2 minutes or we're going to drift into that enemy formation." Captain Blake's voice crackled through his helmet radio. "Almost got it," Cole replied, his hands moving quickly through a tangle of wires that would have confused an engineer from any other species. But Cole had learned his trade in the deep mines of Earth, where equipment failures meant death and repairs had to be done fast and right the first time. He had fixed machinery while hanging upside down in flooded tunnels and rewired electrical systems while standing in pools of toxic water. A damaged spaceship was just another day at the office. The lights flickered and came back on as Cole completed his repairs. The Resilience surged forward just as 3 Nyx destroyers tried to surround it. Admiral Ross felt the ship respond to his commands and smiled grimly. Human engineering was not elegant or sophisticated, but it worked when everything else failed. Across the battle zone, Pilot Watson pushed his fighter through a series of maneuvers that should have torn the small craft apart. The TDF fighters were built like flying tanks with thick armor and powerful engines that could operate in conditions that would destroy more delicate vessels. Watson had learned to fly in Earth's storm systems, where wind shear could flip an aircraft upside down in seconds and lightning could fry every electronic system on board. "Watson, you've got 3 enemy fighters on your tail," his wingman warned. "I see them," Watson replied, rolling his fighter into a dive that took him dangerously close to the surface of Kelvar Prime. The enemy pilots followed, expecting an easy kill on a target that was trapped between their guns and the planet's gravity well. Instead, Watson used the planet's atmosphere to help him turn, skimming through the upper layers of air to change direction in ways that pure spaceflight could not achieve. The Nyx fighters, designed for combat in the clean vacuum of space, could not match his maneuver. 2 of them crashed into each other while trying to follow his impossible turn. The third pulled up too late and burned up in the planet's atmosphere. Down on the surface of Kelvar Prime, the Kelvari people watched the battle from their underground shelters with growing hope. For days they had seen nothing but enemy ships in their sky, raining death down on their cities. Now there were explosions high above as the strange new ships fought against their oppressors. Captain Nayla of the Kelvari Defense Force had survived the initial attack by hiding her small patrol ship in the debris field that had once been their main orbital station. She watched the human fleet with amazement as they danced through the Nyx formations like fighters who had been born in the void of space. "These humans fight like the old legends," she whispered to her crew. "Like the storm warriors from the ancient stories. The Kelvari had myths about beings who could ride lightning and dance with hurricanes, but they had always considered them to be just stories. Now they were seeing something that made those legends seem real." Back in the main battle, Major Torres had successfully captured his second Nyx ship and was leading his Marines through the corridors of an enemy cruiser. The aliens inside were not prepared for boarders who could fight in damaged, depressurized sections of their own ship. Torres and his team moved through areas that the Nyx had abandoned as too dangerous, using their superior equipment and training to strike where the enemy least expected them. "Reactor room secured," Torres reported over the radio, beginning shutdown procedures. "Negative," Admiral Ross's voice came back. "Leave the reactor running. I want you to rig it to overload on my command." Torres grinned inside his helmet. The Admiral was thinking like a true human, turning every captured ship into a potential weapon. "Understood, sir. Setting up remote detonation charges now." Lord Vex watched his fleet's tactical display with growing desperation. He had lost 18 ships in the last hour, while the human fleet had only lost 3 vessels. Worse, 7 of his own ships had been captured by human boarding parties and were now being used against him. The humans were turning his own weapons against his forces, something that no civilized species would ever think to do. "My lord," his tactical officer reported, "the human fleet is using our own ship's communication codes to coordinate their attacks. They're accessing our tactical networks through the captured vessels." "How is that possible?" Vex demanded. "Our encryption systems are the most advanced in the galaxy." But even as he asked the question, Vex was beginning to understand the terrible Truth. These humans did not fight like any other species he had encountered. They were not trying to win an honorable victory through superior technology or tactics. They were trying to survive, and they would use any advantage they could find to do it. The human fleet had scattered his forces and was now hunting his ships like predators, stalking prey. They used the debris from destroyed vessels to hide their movements. They fired on his ships from multiple directions at once, making it impossible to coordinate defensive fire. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to anticipate his orders before he gave them, as if they could read the patterns of his thoughts. Admiral Ross coordinated the battle from the bridge of the Resilience, watching the tactical display with the calm focus of a predator. He had grown up hunting in the deep forests of Earth, where patience and observation were more important than speed or strength. The Nyx fleet was large and powerful, but it was also predictable. They fought like a machine, following patterns that could be learned and exploited. All captured vessels execute wildfire protocol on my mark, Ross ordered. Throughout the battle zone, the Nyx ships that had been taken by human boarding parties suddenly turned their weapons on their former allies. The captured cruiser that Torres had rigged exploded in a massive fireball that took out 2 nearby destroyers. Other human-controlled ships opened fire on the vessels they had been flying beside minutes before. The Nyx formation, which had been weakened by hours of fighting, finally began to collapse. Ships that had maintained perfect spacing throughout the battle started to bunch together as their commanders tried to avoid the chaos spreading through their ranks. This gave the human fleet exactly the opportunity they had been waiting for. All ships execute final attack pattern, Ross commanded. Let's finish this. The human fleet converged on the confused Nyx formation like a closing fist. Lord Vex realized too late that he had been outmaneuvered by a species he had dismissed as primitive. The humans had not just defeated his fleet, they had turned his own strengths against him and made his superior numbers into a weakness. As the TDF Resilience closed in on his flagship, Lord Vex finally understood what he was facing. These were not just warriors from another world. These were survivors from a place so dangerous that it had forged them into something the galaxy had never seen before. The final assault on Lord Vex's flagship came from 6 directions at once. Admiral Ross had positioned his remaining ships in a 3-dimensional web around the massive Nyx dreadnought, using the debris field from destroyed vessels and the planet's gravity to mask their approach. When the attack began, it was not a single charge but a coordinated strike that came from above, below, and all sides simultaneously. Lord Vex stood on his bridge watching death approach from every angle. His ship was the largest and most powerful vessel in the Nyx fleet, armed with weapons that could destroy entire cities and protected by shields that had never been penetrated by enemy fire. But the humans were not trying to penetrate his shields. They were doing something that no other species had ever attempted. "Sir, they're using tractor beams to pull debris into our shield generators," his tactical officer reported with panic in his voice. The human ships were grabbing chunks of destroyed vessels and flinging them at the dreadnought's shield projectors. Each impact weakened the protective barrier, and the humans kept adding more debris until sections of the shield began to flicker and fail. It was crude and brutal and completely effective. "Return fire on all targets," Vex ordered. But his gunners could not lock onto the human ships. They moved too quickly and too unpredictably, using the debris field like cover and the planet's gravity like a weapon. Every time his weapons fired, the humans were already somewhere else. Captain Blake brought the TDF Endurance in close to the dreadnought's hull, so close that the 2 ships were almost touching. At this range, the massive vessel's main guns could not target her ship, and its smaller weapons could not track fast enough to hit her as she moved along the hull like a parasite. "Marine teams are ready for final boarding action," Major Torres reported from the Endurance's launch bay. "Go," Blake ordered. "End this." Torres and his Marines launched directly onto the hull of the enemy flagship. They used magnetic clamps and cutting torches to burn through the armor plating, creating their own entry points instead of using the ship's docking bays. This was something no other species would think to do because it was dangerous and unpredictable. But humans had learned long ago that the most dangerous path was often the safest, because no one expected you to take it. The Marines poured into the dreadnought through a dozen holes cut in its hull. They moved through the ship like a flood, overwhelming the Nix defenders who had never trained to fight boarders inside their own vessel. Torres led one team toward the bridge while other groups secured the engine room and weapons control. The Nix crew fought back with desperation, but they were not prepared for enemies who could function in the damaged sections of their own ship. When Torres blew a hole in the main corridor, the Nix fell back because the area was now exposed to vacuum. The humans simply sealed their helmets and kept fighting in the airless space. On the bridge of the Resilience, Admiral Ross watched the battle reach its final moments. The Nix fleet was scattered and broken, with most ships either destroyed or fleeing toward the edge of the system. Only the flagship remained, and it was now crawling with human marines. "Admiral," came Torres's voice over the radio, "we have reached the bridge. Lord Vex is requesting terms for surrender." Ross considered this for a moment. The smart thing would be to accept the surrender and end the battle, but he thought about the burning cities on Kelvar Prime and the millions of innocent people who had died during the siege. He thought about the Kelvari children hiding in underground shelters while bombs fell from the sky. "Tell Lord Vex that the only terms are unconditional surrender of his entire fleet," Ross replied. "Any ship that tries to leave this system will be hunted down and destroyed." Lord Vex listened to the human terms with the bitter taste of defeat in his mouth. His proud fleet had been shattered by 40 primitive ships crewed by aliens from a world he had never heard of. Everything he understood about warfare had been proven wrong in the span of a few hours. "How?" he asked Torres when the human major appeared on his bridge. "How did you defeat us?" Torres looked at the alien commander with something that might have been pity. "You fight like you come from a safe world," he said simply. "We fight like we come from a place that's been trying to kill us since the day we were born." The surrender was broadcast on all frequencies, and within minutes the remaining Nix ships began powering down their weapons. Some tried to run, but the human fleet was faster and more maneuverable. Those ships were destroyed quickly and efficiently, their wreckage adding to the debris field that surrounded Kelvar Prime. Down on the planet's surface, the Kelvari people emerged from their shelters to see a sky free of enemy ships for the first time in weeks. Captain Nella brought her patrol ship up from the debris field and joined the human fleet as they established orbit around the liberated world. "This is Admiral Ross of the Terran Defense Fleet to all Kelvari forces," came the transmission that reached every receiver on the planet. "Your world is secure. The Nix fleet has been destroyed or captured. Medical and engineering teams are standing by to assist with relief efforts." The celebrations that erupted across Kelvar Prime could be seen from space as lights appeared in the darkness where cities had been bombed. The Kelvari had survived, and they owed their lives to a species most of them had never heard of before. Word of the battle spread quickly through the galaxy's communication networks. On Station Prime, Ambassador Tala found herself surrounded by representatives who could barely believe the reports they were receiving. The human fleet had not just defeated the Nix Empire's Fourth Fleet, they had crushed it so completely that survivors were already fleeing toward the outer rim of the galaxy. The elegant Alterian delegate who had questioned humanity's sanity now approached Tala with something approaching respect. "How many ships did you lose?" he asked quietly. 7, Tala replied. 7 ships and 436 people. The numbers were impossible by every standard of galactic warfare. No fleet had ever achieved such a decisive victory against superior numbers with such minimal losses. The mathematical models used by every military in the galaxy said it could not be done. Sage Moore of the Korthani made his way through the crowd of stunned diplomats to reach Tala's side. His ancient eyes held a mixture of satisfaction and worry. "The old warnings were true," he said softly. "The Deathworld species has come to the stars, and nothing will ever be the same." Admiral Ross stood on the bridge of the Resilience as his fleet began the journey home. Behind them, Kelvar Prime glowed with the lights of a world returning to life. Ahead lay Earth and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. "Sir," Captain Blake said, "we're receiving thousands of messages from across the galaxy. Species requesting defense treaties, governments offering trade agreements, and military leaders asking for training exchanges." Ross nodded. The galaxy had learned something important today. When someone called for help, humans answered. And when humans answered, they brought with them all the hard-won wisdom of a species that had learned to survive on a world that never stopped fighting back. The human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind a galaxy that suddenly understood it had new neighbors. Neighbors who came from a place so dangerous it had forged them into the ultimate survivors. The age of humanity among the stars had begun,